He was known as the poet. He was called the last soul man. But mostly, people whispered a different name. They called him the traitor who slept with the wife of the great Sam Cooke. That one mistake stained his legacy like red wine on white silk. But before the scandals and the flashing lights, there was just a hungry boy in Cleveland, Ohio. Born on March 4th, 1944, he grew up in a one-bedroom shack. Picture this: 5 brothers squeezed into one bed. His parents slept on the floor in the living room. The fridge was empty. His stomach growled louder than the radio. When there was no food, they picked through garbage or just drank water. His father told them they were fasting for Jesus. But his mother told them the cold truth. She said they had to sing their way out of the ghetto. Here is the deal. He was terrified of his father. One day, he broke a string on his dad's prized guitar. He knew a whipping was coming. To save his skin, he flipped that guitar upside down. He played it left-handed. The music didn't just save him. It brought tears to his father's eyes. The boy was Bobby Womack, and his long, hard road was just beginning. Cleveland was cold, but the Womack house was crowded. Picture a family tree with branches that tangled everywhere. On his mother's side, she had 15 brothers and sisters. On his father's side, he had 15 brothers and sisters too. The family reunions looked like small armies, but inside their own home, the world was small. Bobby was the third oldest of 5 boys. They lived in a tiny, one-bedroom shack. The walls were thin. The wind whistled through the cracks. Space was a luxury they could not afford. At night, 5 brothers piled into one bed. They slept head to toe, arms and legs tangled together. They breathed the same stale air. While the boys slept on the mattress, their parents took the floor. They slept on the hard wood in the living room. Poverty wasn't just a word. It was a smell. It was a feeling in the pit of your stomach. They were dirt poor. Some nights, the refrigerator was just a metal box full of air. There was no bread. There was no milk. The boys would walk the alleys. They picked through garbage cans. They looked for anything edible, a half-eaten apple, a stale crust of bread. It was survival. When the food ran out completely, they sat at the table with empty plates. They drank tap water until their bellies felt full. It sloshed around when they walked. Their father, a strict man, tried to give it meaning. He told the boys they were fasting for Jesus. He tried to make the hunger holy, but his mother was different. She looked at her sons with hard eyes. She didn't talk about fasting. She talked about escape. She told Bobby and his brothers the cold truth. She said they had to sing their way out of the ghetto. No one else was coming to save them. Music was the only thing that drowned out the sound of a growling stomach. Their father sang in a gospel group called the Voices of Love. When the men came over to practice, the house shook with harmony. The boys watched from the shadows. They studied every note. They memorized every breath. When the men left, the boys took over. They mocked their father's friends. They imitated the deep bass and the sharp tenor. They stomped their feet on the floorboards. One day, the father came home early. He heard singing. It wasn't the radio. It sounded like his own group, but it was coming from the bedroom. He opened the door. He didn't yell. He stood there and listened. He was impressed. He saw a way out. He decided right then to form a new group. He called them the Womack Brothers. But here's the deal. Bobby was special. He was the favorite son. He was loud. He was bold. He had a fire in him that the others lacked. But his father was a hard man. Discipline came from the end of a belt. One afternoon, Bobby made a mistake. He picked up his father's prized guitar. He played it hard. Asterisk, snap, asterisk. A string broke. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small house. Bobby froze. He knew a whipping was coming. He couldn't hide the broken string. He had to prove his worth. He had to show his father that the music mattered more than a mistake. He didn't put the guitar down. He flipped it over. He held it upside down. He pressed the strings with his right hand and strummed with his left. It is incredibly hard to play this way. The chords are backward. The strings are in the wrong order. But Bobby played. He made the guitar sing. His father walked in. He saw the broken string. His eyes narrowed. Then he looked at Bobby's hands. He saw the boy playing left-handed. He saw the talent bleeding out of him. The anger melted away. Tears filled the father's eyes. He didn't hit him. He went to the store and bought guitars for all of them. The Womack brothers started to move. They sang in local churches. They traveled the gospel circuit. They opened for legends like the Five Blind Boys. They saw the road. They smelled the diesel fumes of the tour bus. But they were still just kids from the shack. Then a giant came to town. The biggest group in the world was the Soul Stirrers. Their lead singer was a young man named Sam Cooke. This was before the pop hits. This was before You Send Me. But Sam was already a star. He was handsome. He was smooth. When he sang in church, the air changed. Women in the front row screamed. They fell out in the aisles. Tears streamed down their faces. Sam Cooke made gospel feel like romance. He brought the young people back to the church. The old preachers hated it. They said he was mixing the holy with the profane, but the people loved him. Mr. Womack knew this was the chance. He found Sam Cooke. He asked the star to listen to his sons. He asked if the boys could open the show. Sam looked at the Womack brothers. He saw the hunger. He saw the talent. He smiled and said yes. Sam Cooke took a liking to them. He told them to keep singing. He promised to help them. He promised to lift them up. Sam kept his word. He became their mentor. He became their ticket out of the one-bedroom shack. But gravity pulls hardest when you are high up. The Womack brothers looked at Sam Cooke like a savior. They didn't know that this friendship came with a price. They didn't know that the man who saved them would be the reason their family would eventually tear itself apart. The silence in the car on the way home was louder than the applause. Sam Cooke made a promise. He looked at those hungry boys from Cleveland and vowed to help them. He told them he would lift them out of the cold, and Sam Cooke did not break his word. The Womack brothers stepped onto the tour bus, and the one-bedroom shack disappeared in the rearview mirror. But here's the deal. They weren't just stepping onto a bus, they were stepping into history. The world of music was divided. It was a black and white world. When black artists played, the industry had a specific name for it. They didn't call it pop, they didn't call it rock and roll, they called it color music. It was a label that kept them in a box. It kept the money low and the audiences segregated. But Bobby Womack was standing on the edge of a revolution. He was there when the walls came down. He was there when color music died and something new was born. They gave it a new name. They called it soul music. Picture the scene. It wasn't just church choirs anymore. It was smoky nightclubs. It was bright lights reflecting off polished chrome. Bobby was right in the center of the storm. He wasn't just watching from the sidelines. He was working with the kings. The source material tells us the facts. Bobby stood shoulder to shoulder with the giants. He was in the studio with James Brown. He felt the raw power of the godfather of soul. He worked with Ray Charles. He saw the genius behind the dark glasses. And of course, there was Sam Cooke. Sam was the sun, and everyone else was orbiting around him. Sam had crossed over. He had girls crying in the aisles. He had replaced the old lead singer of the Soul Stirrers, R.H. Harris, and taken the energy to a whole new level. For Bobby, this was an education that money could not buy. He was the poet. He was the preacher. He was becoming the last soul man. But let's talk about the sound. Most people know the name Jimi Hendrix. When you think of a left-handed guitar player shredding the strings, you see Jimmy in a purple haze. You see him burning a guitar on stage. But history often forgets the pioneers. Bobby Womack was doing it first. Remember the boy who flipped the guitar upside down to avoid a whipping? That boy grew up. He didn't change his style. He perfected it. He played a right-handed guitar with his left hand. The strings were upside down. The low notes were at the bottom. The high notes were at the top. It is a style that breaks your brain if you try to learn it. But for Bobby, it was natural. He made that guitar talk. He made it cry. He proved that he belonged on the same stage as the legends. He wasn't just Sam Cooke's protege anymore. He was a force of nature. The life of the Womack brothers changed overnight. The days of picking through garbage cans were gone. The nights of drinking water to fill empty bellies were over. They were no longer fasting for Jesus. They were feasting on fame. Imagine the feeling. You grow up sharing a bed with 4 brothers. You grow up with 15 aunts and uncles on one side and 15 on the other. You know nothing but struggle. Then, suddenly, the doors open. The suits are silk. The cars are long. The food is hot. Sam Cooke was the man. That is what the streets said. That is what the charts said. And because Sam was the man, Bobby was the prince. They traveled the roads that used to be dangerous for young black men, but now they traveled as stars. They had the protection of fame. Sam encouraged them to keep going. He told them to keep writing. He saw the fire in Bobby. He saw the boldness that had once broken a guitar string. He nurtured it. It felt like the summer would never end. The music was good. The money was flowing. The color music label was fading, replaced by the deep, rich sound of soul. Bobby Womack was young, gifted, and standing on top of the world. He had the best mentor in the business. He had the talent to back it up. He had a family that had sung their way out of the ghetto, just like his mother predicted. But gravity is a cruel law. The higher you climb, the harder you fall. The Womack brothers were riding high on Sam Cooke's success. They thought the party would last forever. They didn't see the storm clouds gathering. They didn't know that the man who gave them everything would also be the center of their greatest tragedy. The world saw the smiles. The world heard the hits. The world saw the shiny suits and the left-handed guitar. But behind the curtain, fate was sharpening a knife. The silence was about to be louder than the applause. December 11th, 1964. That is the day the music stopped. The news hit the radio waves like a physical blow. Sam Cooke was dead. The king of soul, the man with the golden voice, was gone. He was shot to death in a cheap motel called the Hacienda in Los Angeles. The details were ugly. The rumors were nasty. But for Bobby Womack, the pain was blinding. Sam was his mentor. Sam was his brother. Sam was the father figure who didn't use a belt. The Womack brothers were lost. Their compass was broken. They stood at the funeral and watched thousands of people weep in the streets. But grief does strange things to a man. It twists your mind. It makes you reach for anything that feels familiar. Here's the deal. Bobby made a move that shocked the world. It didn't just shock them, it made them hate him. Less than 3 months after Sam Cooke was lowered into the ground, Bobby Womack walked down the aisle. He didn't walk alone. He was holding hands with Barbara Campbell. Barbara was Sam Cooke's widow. The ink on the death certificate was barely dry. Bobby was just 21 years old. He stood at the altar, and people whispered that he was wearing Sam's suit. He was driving Sam's cars. He was living in Sam's house. To the outside world, it looked like a robbery. It looked like the young prince had killed the king to steal his throne. The backlash was instant. It was violent. Picture this. Bobby walked into radio stations, smiling, holding his new record. The DJs looked at him with cold eyes. They took his vinyl record. They smashed it against the desk. They threw the pieces in the trash can. They told him to get out. They said he was a traitor. They said he was the man who slept with the wife of a dead hero. The black community turned its back on him. The churches that raised him closed their doors. He went to perform at a concert in Chicago. The crowd didn't clap. They booed. Then they attacked. They beat him until he was bruised and bloody. They nearly killed him for his sin. Bobby tried to explain. He said he was just trying to keep the family together. He said he was afraid. He said he and Barbara were two drowning people clinging to the same raft, but no one wanted to hear it. The sentence was passed. Bobby Womack was an outcast. But wait, it gets worse. The pressure cracked the family foundation. The Womack brothers fell apart. The group disbanded. The money stopped flowing. The silk suits were replaced by fear. Bobby was alone. He was talented. Yes, he could make a guitar cry. But now, he was crying too. He tried to rebuild. He wrote songs for other people. He played guitar in the shadows where no one could see his face. He played on hits for Aretha Franklin. He played for Wilson Pickett. He poured his pain into the strings. The industry used his talent, but they hid his name. Then, tragedy struck inside his own home. Bobby had a brother named Harry. Harry was the sweet one. He sang tenor. He stayed by Bobby's side when the world walked away. Harry was living at Bobby's apartment in Los Angeles. They argued. It was a stupid fight. It was over something small, maybe clothes, maybe jealous words. But the woman went into the kitchen. She grabbed a steak knife. She plunged it into Harry's chest. Bobby wasn't there when it happened. He came home to silence. He found his brother bleeding out on the floor. Harry Womack died right there in the apartment. The loss shattered Bobby into a million pieces. Harry was his link to the past. Harry was the memory of the one-bedroom shack in Cleveland. Now, Harry was gone. The grief was too heavy to carry. The guilt was a stone around his neck. First Sam, then the hatred of the public, now Harry. Bobby needed an escape. He needed to numb the pain. He found a new friend. It was white powder. It was cocaine. The drug didn't judge him. It didn't call him a traitor. It made the voices stop. It made the guilt fade away for a few hours. Bobby dove headfirst into addiction. He partied for days without sleeping. He spent money as fast as he made it. He surrounded himself with people who didn't care about his soul, only his fame. His health began to fail. His vision blurred. His memory slipped. The poet, who could write a song about the deepest human emotions, could barely hold a pen. He was running from ghosts. He was running from the shadow of Sam Cooke. He was running from the blood on his apartment floor. The fall was long. It was dark. The boy who played the guitar upside down was now living life upside down. He had fame, but no respect. He had money, but no peace. He had a wife, but she belonged to a ghost. Bobby Womack was screaming for help, but the music was too loud. No one was listening. The silence in his heart was louder than the applause he used to hear, and the bottom was still a long way down. The wedding photos did not look like a celebration. They looked like evidence. Picture the scene. It was 1965. The grave of Sam Cooke was still fresh. The dirt had not even settled. Yet, there stood Bobby Womack. He was wearing a silk suit that looked just like Sam's. He was driving a car that used to belong to Sam. And he was holding hands with Barbara Campbell, the woman who was Sam's wife just 3 months before. The public reaction was not just anger, it was hatred. Here is the deal. In the eyes of the world, Bobby was a villain. The newspapers painted him as a traitor. They said he was a young opportunist who stepped over a dead body to get the girl and the money. The black community felt betrayed. Sam Cooke was royalty. You do not touch the queen when the king dies. The radio DJs screamed into their microphones. They took Bobby's records and smashed them live on air. The sound of cracking vinyl was the soundtrack of his life. They threw the pieces in the trash. They told their listeners that Bobby Womack was canceled. But the media missed the other side of the story. They didn't see the fear. Bobby wasn't a master villain. He was a kid. He was 21 years old. He told anyone who would listen that he was scared. He said he married Barbara to protect her. He said he was trying to keep the family together because he feared the Womack brothers would starve without Sam. He was a drowning man grabbing onto the only raft he saw. But the streets did not care about his reasons. They only saw the disrespect. The hypocrisy of fame is a cold thing. The same people who cheered for his guitar playing now wanted to hurt him. He went to Chicago for a concert. He thought the music would save him. He was wrong. The crowd didn't clap. They attacked. They pulled him off the stage. They beat him until he was bloody. They tried to choke him out. He barely escaped with his life. The doors of the industry slammed shut. The Womack brothers were finished. No reputable manager would touch him. No label wanted to put his face on a cover. So, Bobby Womack became a ghost. This is the part of the story that most people forget. The world hated the man, but they needed his fingers. Bobby went underground. He traveled to Memphis. He went to Muscle Shoals. He became a session musician. He sat in the back of the studio, far away from the cameras. He played guitar for the biggest names in the world. He wrote songs for Wilson Pickett. He played on sessions for Aretha Franklin. When you hear those classic soul hits from the late 60s, you are often hearing the ghost of Bobby Womack. The industry was happy to use his talent to make money, as long as they didn't have to say his name. But money cannot cure a cursed heart. While he played in the shadows, his personal life turned into a horror movie. The marriage to Barbara was a disaster. It was built on grief and guilt. Arguments shook the walls. Then came the ultimate tragedy. His brother Harry was killed in Bobby's own apartment. The violence had followed him home. This was the moment the silence broke him. Bobby couldn't handle the memories. He couldn't handle the face of his dead brother or the ghost of Sam Cooke looking over his shoulder. So he found a new way to cope. He didn't turn to the church. He turned to cocaine. The drug was the only thing that made the noise stop. It numbed the pain of being the most hated man in soul music. For years, he floated in a haze of white powder. He wrecked cars. He lost money. He burned bridges. The public thought justice had been served. They saw a washed-up junkie. They saw a man who paid the price for his sin. They thought Bobby Womack was over. They thought the poet had written his last line. But gravity works both ways. It pulls you down, but it also gives you a place to push off from. Bobby Womack was down, but he was not dead. And in the darkness of his addiction, a new sound was beginning to form. A sound that was rougher, deeper, and more painful than anything he had played before. The traitor was about to become a legend, but he had to survive the night first. Bobby Womack was a survivor. The industry tried to bury him. The public tried to silence him. The drugs tried to kill him. But the boy from Cleveland refused to stay down. Here is the deal. You can hate the man, but you cannot deny the music. Bobby clawed his way back from the edge of the cliff. In the 1980s, he released an album simply called The Poet. It was a masterpiece. His voice had changed. It was no longer the smooth, young tenor that charmed Sam Cooke. It was raspy. It was deep. It sounded like gravel mixing with honey. It was the sound of a man who had seen the bottom of the bottle and lived to tell the tale. He proved that pain is the best fuel for art. He became known as the last soul man. While other stars from his era faded away or passed on, Bobby kept working. He refused to become a museum piece. Near the end of his life, he worked with the band Gorillaz. He stood on big stages in front of thousands of kids who were not even born when Sam Cooke died. He showed a whole new generation what real soul looked like. But his legacy is complicated. When people say the name Bobby Womack, two things happen. Some people shake their heads. They remember the betrayal. They remember the marriage to Barbara Campbell less than 3 months after the funeral. They remember the chaos and the headlines. But other people close their eyes. They hear the opening chords of If You Think You're Lonely Now. They feel the raw honesty of Across 110th Street. They remember the guitar player who flipped the instrument upside down and made it cry. He was a man of contradictions. He was a preacher who sinned. He was a poet who could not find the right words to save his family. He was a genius who made terrible choices. But through it all, he was honest. He put every mistake, every regret, and every tear into his strings. He died in 2014. He left behind a catalog of music that defined an era. He showed us that you can fall from grace and still land on your feet. He proved that redemption isn't given to you by a judge or a newspaper. You have to earn it, note by note. Some stories end without closure, but dignity doesn't need applause. So, what do you think? When you hear his name, do you remember the scandal or do you remember the songs? Did Bobby Womack earn his forgiveness? Tell us your favorite track in the comments below. We want to hear from you.